Postpone further proceedings today on the question of approving any measure or matter or adopting an amendment for which a recorded vote is ordered. Now recognize the gentleman from Kansas to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, gentlemen. Pursuant to notice, I call up H.R. 59, the Mens Rea Reform Act of 2025, for purpose of a markup and move the committee reported favorably to the House. The clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 59.
Without objection, the bill will be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate you bringing this bill forward today. In 2010, the Heritage Foundation and the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers published a report titled, "Without Intent, How Congress is Eroding the Criminal Intent Requirement in Federal Law." And I would ask for unanimous consent. That'd be...
Without objection.
Thank you. The report authors analyzed 446 nonviolent criminal offenses proposed in the 109th Congress, and they found that 50% of the analyzed offenses lacked adequate mens rea provisions. In 2021, they followed it up, same group, National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers and the Heritage Foundation, and they found that the trend continues. And only thing different being that maybe even more bills are being passed without adequate mens rea requirements. Just a couple of weeks ago, we had a hearing, and the witness brought in by the Democrats in his opening statement advocated for the passage of this bill, H.R. 59, and also mentioned the following bill that we'll do also favorably. What I'm suggesting to you is this should be a bipartisan approach to this bill today. I'm looking for that. I believe that we should do that because there is so many issues here. So when you begin to compare John Carlo Canaparo during the hearing, who was comparing federal crimes that are morally wrong and the federal offenses that are regulatory in nature, he cited some bizarre examples, such as the prohibition on selling Swiss cheese without holes, the requirement for certain toy balls to carry specific warnings, and the estimate is that there's more than 5,000 of those types of crimes, except for when you get into the rule process, the bureaucratic crime-making process, you'll find that there are hundreds of thousands of those, and they don't have mens rea requirements. I'll give you a couple cases. The one that really sings to me is the Gibson Guitar Corporation's factories in Nashville and Memphis. They bring in exotic woods, computers, guitars. Everything was seized under the allegation that they had violated the Lacey Act because they imported rosewood and ebony that was not harvested or exported in compliance with Indian and Malagasy law. But the Lacey Act makes it a federal crime to import wildlife or plants taken or traded in violation of any foreign law, but the relevant foreign laws were not clear, not publicly available, not consistently enforced by their own federal governments, and indeed the statute did not require the importer knowingly or have any culpable mental state to violate the law. So ultimately, they were imposing or seeking to impose, the feds were, criminal liability without any knowledge or intent on the part of the actor. That is against the longstanding Anglo-Saxon historic history of the jurisprudence that we have. There are other cases. We have the individual a case highlighted by the Democrats' witness, Mike Fox, and this is the case of Michelino Sunseri, who is a professional trail runner, and he was charged with a federal misdemeanor by the National Park Service for running on a trail that was allegedly closed, despite the fact that the trail had been used without incident for more than 50 years and did not have any signage indicating its closure. Again, there was no culpable mental state. There was no way for him to know, and nor was there ostensibly a requirement for a culpable mental state. But the Mens Rea Reform Act directly addresses these concerns by creating a default knowingly standard for federal crimes lacking explicit mens rea requirements. By restoring the essential element of criminal law, the culpable mental state, Congress can help ensure that only those who act with intent or knowledge are subjected to the penalties of the criminal justice system, which is fair. It reinforces civil liberties, and it curbs prosecutorial overreach. And that's the purpose of this bill. And Mr. Chairman, I thank you for bringing it forward, and I encourage everyone from both sides of the aisle to vote aye in favor of this. Let's move this along today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Raskin, for an opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and thanks for calling a hearing, a markup session on these bills. And I thank the distinguished gentleman from Arizona for his remarks on it. I'm delighted that we're taking up the whole question of over-criminalization, which is indeed a serious matter for the people of the country. Just as the people can obviously suffer from there being too many crimes taking place in society, we also can suffer from there being too many criminal laws in the country. Everybody knows the basic legal dictum that ignorance of the law is no excuse. That's not going to get you out of prosecution for an offense that you didn't know about it. On the other hand, if we have tens of thousands of laws, nobody can know what all of the laws are. And so it is essential to a society based on ordered liberty and the rule of law that people have the chance to know what the laws are. Unfortunately, we have a couple of bills we're bringing forward today, including this one, the Mens Rea Reform Act and the End Endless Criminal Statutes Act, which put the cart before the horse, or put two carts before the horse. The horse is the one that we all agree on, the Count the Crimes Act, being done on a bipartisan basis by Mr. Roy and by Ms. McBath. Let's determine what the problem is. What's the scope of the problem? What are all of the criminal laws that are out there? It's remarkable that we have no inventory. We have no basic understanding of what all of them are. Now, in a bunch of those, I would agree with the gentleman from Arizona that we should alter the mens rea to make sure that there is a knowledge level of culpability there. In others, that would undermine the law and undermine public safety if we were to do that. And that's why we need to put them all together to figure out what is actually the landscape we're dealing with. Unfortunately, I'm going to oppose this law. It is, or this bill is premature to bring it forward right now. And in fact, in a number of fields, we need stronger anti-corruption laws and anti-fraud laws as we're living through a period of tremendous corruption and fraud and scams that are taking place against our people. And we would want to scrutinize very carefully what the abolition of the mens rea or the current culpability standards would mean, and to replace it with a higher level of culpability with a knowing level of mens rea. But we've seen a weakening of the laws against fraud and corruption, and we should be moving in the other direction. 15 years ago, the Supreme Court overturned the conviction of Jeffrey Skilling, the Enron CEO, whose massive fraud and conspiracy scheme wiped out billions of dollars in employees' retirement savings and shareholder equity. 4 years later, the Supreme Court threw out Governor Bob McDonnell's conviction in Virginia on bribery charges stemming from favors that he did for Virginia businessmen who lavished him with $175,000 in gifts and cash and loans. And the court did that by making it more difficult to prove that a quid pro quo had taken place. And just last year, the court tossed out the conviction of James Snyder, an Indiana mayor who steered $1 million in city contracts to a trucking company that paid him $13,000 in kickbacks. These are just a few examples of the kinds of gaps in the anti-fraud and anti-corruption toolbox we really should be fixing at a time when criminal prosecutions of white-collar crimes have been declining for decades. So if we were to just pass the Mens Rea Reform Act, it would make these problems worse. It would exacerbate the ability of people to be getting away with white-collar crimes like criminal fraud and tax evasion, kickbacks, and other kinds of corruption. So we think this is too early to be doing this. I look forward to working with the gentleman on reform of culpability standards in a far more targeted and selective way moving forward in the future. And let's definitely go ahead and pass the Count the Crimes Act so we can get a real sense of what is out there. And with that, I urge my colleagues to oppose the bill, and I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
I think the gentleman is back without objection. All other opening statements will be included in the record. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute.
I make the motion to.
Jimenez amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a
Without
substitute.
objection, the amendment in the nature of a substitute will be considered as read and shall be considered as base text for the purposes of amendment. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona to explain the amendment.
Mr. Chairman, this is just have a couple technical corrections in it. Otherwise, it echoes the underlying bill.
Anyone seek recognition? Gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You bet.
Our criminal justice system is meant to prevent us from harm and to keep our country safe by creating a system to hold any wrongdoers accountable for their actions. Our system relies on the numerous laws that we already have in place, laws that need to be updated and they need to be clarified to ensure that justice is carried out properly. That is why I am proud to co-lead the bipartisan Count the Crimes to Cut Act of 2025, which would aid Congress in getting the data that we need to determine the exact number of federal crimes on the books and help us to better identify places where we might eliminate crimes that no longer make sense so that we can make sure our criminal justice system is focused on what really matters. Beyond just identifying the number of crimes, the Count the Crimes to Cut Act directs the Attorney General to include in the report the mens rea requirement of all federal crimes, which sets the required mental state that a person must have to be considered guilty of the alleged crime. Yet before we can even receive that full accounting, my colleagues across the aisle want to pass the Mens Rea Reform Act simultaneously, which would establish a default mens rea standard of knowingly for federal criminal statutory and regulatory offenses that lack an explicit mens rea standard. Under this standard, prosecutors would have to prove that defendants knew or did not willingly turn a blind eye to the facts that constitute their offense. So what does this mean in practice? Rather than relying on precise data to determine where reforms are actually needed, this proposal would make radical changes to existing law and threaten to undermine the ability of the government to prosecute a range of crimes, putting public health, safety, and the environment at risk. For example, at a time when the current administration is suspending key quality control programs and purging staff who run our country's health and safety programs, the Mens Rea Reform Act could also jeopardize holding bad actors accountable who put harmful products out in the marketplace. Take the CEO of the Peanut Corporation of America, who was sentenced to 28 years in prison in 2015 after more than 700 cases of salmonella poisoning, which resulted in 9 deaths. They were traced to one of his factories in my home state of Georgia. If the proposed mens rea standard applied to conspiracy, one of the charges that the CEO and his fellow executive were convicted of, prosecutors would have had to prove both that the officials worked together to ship tainted peanut products and that they understood that such action constituted an illegal conspiracy to convict on that charge. Taking actions that result in shipping tainted food that kills people may no longer be enough to convict those who are responsible for conspiracy. Beyond the default mens rea standard, the bill could also change existing standards in the law. And of course, this has to be viewed in the context of President Trump's rampant efforts to let white-collar criminals off the hook, from deprioritizing white-collar prosecutions to gutting the Department of Justice anti-corruption unit, to pardoning those most loyal to him who had already been convicted, while ensuring those individuals don't have to pay a dime to those that they have harmed. Passage of the Mens Rea Act would allow Trump to achieve his goal, of throwing white-collar prosecutions down the drain more effectively. It would not help those who are most affected by this country's overcriminalization. While I agree we should have a robust conversation about strengthening mens rea requirements in our federal criminal statutes, let's not put the cart before the horse. I look forward to joining my colleagues in getting the Count the Crimes to Cut Act to the President's desk so that we can identify which laws actually need mens rea reform. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am intrigued to hear that the argument is not that we should not fix mens rea, but that we should first count the crimes. Count the crimes, they say. I find it intriguing because their own witness 2 weeks ago said, we need to pass this bill, H.R. 59. Their own witness, wasn't me. Well, I was advocating it, but their witness said it, yeah. And the McDonald case, that wasn't some kind of split along ideological grounds. That was an 8-0 decision. That was an 8-0 decision. And I will say the gentlelady from Georgia actually said this correctly. She said this bill will fix those crimes that lack an explicit mens rea. That's right. And how many of those are there? Hundreds of thousands. There are more than 5,000 federal crime statutes.
Right,
But there are over 300,000, and the CRS, when we've inquired multiple times, said we cannot even count the number of regulatory crimes. So while you're busy counting them, how many years will go by with no mens rea? I want you to think about what that means. That means effectively strict liability then. That's what you're defaulting to in the American criminal system, the federal level. We're going to default to strict liability because we have no idea what these mens rea are. And what our bill does, what this bill does, is this corrects that. Nothing should tilt the playing field in favor of the prosecution. That is antithetical to the American system of jurisprudence and criminal law. You are innocent until proven guilty. And the very idea that you're going to default to a strict liability standard is absolutely, it's outrageous, quite frankly. Outrageous. Because the bottom line is, you need to actually, in most cases, have some kind of mental culpability. It might be criminally negligent, maybe it's recklessness, but most often it's going to be knowing. Most often it's going to be knowing. That's why the states, which is almost every state that adopted the Uniform Criminal Code 30, 40 years ago, that's why they had the 4 culpable mental states in there. Because that is the burden of the prosecution in those acts. So you get the actus reus, then you get the mens rea. So while you're counting the laws, how many people will be prosecuted effectively on strict liability when the mens rea, the appropriate mens rea, would be knowing? And I did get a kick out of this one, that if you insert a culpable mental state into a federal crime, that somehow that's exacerbating the problem. I mean, the ungodly burden of saying this person knew that the path that they're running on was a closed path, and so we can charge them with a crime. Even though we didn't ever have it marked, and we had a path there that had been used for 50 years. That's the kind of stuff where you go, what are you thinking? What are you thinking? This is the American jurisprudential way of holding people accountable for criminal culpability. And that typically is you gotta prove the actus reus, you gotta prove the culpable mental state. Everybody knows when you're prosecuting a case, you're counting the elements, you're looking at every element of the crime, and you're gonna prove every element of the crime, and you're gonna do it systematically. That's what you do. But here, We're saying, what the Democrats are saying today is, well, we think what should happen, there's literally hundreds of thousands of crimes with no mens rea in it. So what we want to do is count those first. And in the years intervening while they're counting those, then we're going to say, well, too bad if we're going to apply effectively a strict liability type of analysis to it. Because all they're going to look at is the actus reus, and that's a problem. That's why you should pass this bill, and I yield.
Mr. Chairman?
Gentleman yields.
Mr. Chairman?
Gentlelady from California is recognized.
I'd just like to say, I understand the gentleman from passion, but I think Ms. McBath has laid out a thoughtful and orderly way to accomplish our mutual goals in a way that will be successful. And I think her presentation was very orderly and persuasive. And I would like to yield to the ranking member, Mr. Raskin.
I thank the gentlelady from California. The gentleman from Arizona has invoked our witness on his behalf, so I want to invoke his witness on our behalf, because his witness, Mr. Giancarlo Canaparo, said the first step towards solving this problem is to gain a clear sense of its magnitude. And he argues precisely for the Count the Crimes Act. I think maybe we're overstating the disagreement between us. The vast majority of offenses already have the mens rea requirement that the gentleman from Arizona and I concur should be the basis for federal criminal law. But for the young people present today, and there seem to be a lot of them, Mr. Chairman, their eyes seem to be glazing over. This is actually kind of an interesting thing we're talking about here. And so let me try to revive my role as a law professor for 1 second. The criminal laws have what's called a standard of culpability. What does the prosecution have to prove in order to show beyond a reasonable doubt that a person's guilty? And for most of our crimes, it's already the rule that you have to show that the person acted willfully or knowingly. They knew what they were doing they acted knowingly with respect to every material element of the offense, or they acted purposefully, deliberately with respect to every part of the offense. But there are certain crimes that have negligence or strict liability as a standard, okay? And we don't even know what all of those are. That's why we want to count the crimes, to round them all up so we don't, engage in an exercise of pin the tail on the donkey where we're blindfolded and we're just saying, well, let's assign this level of culpability to particular offenses without knowing it. Well, what are some of the strict liability offenses? Well, one of them is selling alcohol to minors. If a bar or a tavern is accused of selling alcohol to minors, they can't say, oh, I didn't know that that person was really 17. Well, but that is the law, and that's a policy choice that's been made. And so there are policy choices that have been made like that. Statutory rape is another one. It doesn't, if you have sex with a 15 or 16-year-old, it does not have to be proven that you knew the person was 15 or 16. The burden is on you to determine it. That's a policy decision. You might disagree with that, Mr. Biggs, but that was a policy decision made by the legislature. So I don't think we just want to say we are going to, with a broad brush, go out and overturn the level of culpability that has been assigned by prior legislatures to particular criminal offenses without looking at what they are and what that would mean. Possession of narcotics is another one. Certain environmental crimes are strict liability offenses. You can't say, well, I didn't know what the precise mixture of that toxic waste sludge was that I dumped into the lake or dumped into the land. You're strictly liable for it. That might be the right policy choice, it might be the wrong policy choice, but that's a policy decision. And now the suggestion is, before even creating an inventory of all of these criminal offenses, we're just going to overturn what the existing level of culpability is built into the statute. And that's just a very, I think a reckless way to go from a legislative perspective. Let's inventory what all the crimes are. Let's count them up. Let's get them in front us, and then we can go one by one and act like legislators and say, yeah, we should go with the basic willfulness standard for mens rea, or there's a reason to keep a strict liability standard. But I, for one, am not willing just to cast one vote and overturn the level of culpability and the handiwork of prior Congresses and just saying, we're going to go to this one particular.
Will the gentleman yield?
It's actually my time, and I wanted to yield to the gentlelady from Georgia, wanted just a final statement.
And thank you very much. And actually, if you take a look, it's actually, the investigation is only for 1 year's time. Just 1 year's time. So you're not talking about an extended period of time. You're talking about 1 year's time to do the work that we need to do before we move forward.
I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I thank the chairman, and I appreciate that we are here, I think, with at least some bipartisan agreement on the extent to which we have an over-criminalized but it will take time, significant time. I'm concerned that notwithstanding our passing the act, which I hope we will do out of committee today and from the floor forthwith, and hopefully the Senate will move it, previous efforts to count the crimes have failed miserably because there are so many of them. And because it is so difficult to wrap your arms around 5,500 crimes of varying natures and 300,000 pages of criminal codes and regulations that have now criminalized every act that you can possibly imagine for the American people. And I think the issue here, why I support, of course, the Count the Crimes legislation, but also the gentleman from Arizona's legislation on mens rea, is this is not a new issue. This is an issue that has been around for decades. There was committees that were formed in the 1970s to look at this. There have been bipartisan efforts over time with people ranging the ideological spectrum because of the importance of mens rea. Now, why does mens rea matter? Because you ought to know, you ought to have to know the crime, you ought to have intent, you ought to have knowingly committed the crime, the various things that we have put in the elements of various statutes, but not always. And that's the issue. Right? And so what this is attempting to do is say, okay, there are in fact many statutes, including, by the way, a lot of the white-collar crimes that the gentleman has alluded to, for example, the Clean Water Act, which has language in there like knowingly. And my concern here is that we have significant statutes and regulations that do not have that clarity. And the gentleman from Arizona, I think, is rightly trying to put the clarity in there. For example, and I'd like to insert in the record without objection, or ask unanimous consent, I should say, to put in the record a report from the Right on Crime organization. Congress needs to make up its mind, mens rea reform and why it matters. So I'd ask consent to do that.
Without objection.
And one of the things that they note in here is that criminal penalties were historically imposed for inherently immoral acts, such as murder, arson, rape, immorality, some could say. It can largely mimic rules to protect public safety. But nowadays, criminal penalties attach to a wide range of actions. Take, for example, 18 U.S.C. 336, which makes it a federal misdemeanor to write a check for less than a sum of $1. Like, that's absurd. I mean, I'm sure some of the folks in the audience don't even know what a check is, but the fact is that's absurd to write a check for less than $1 is a federal offense, right? So you say, all right, well, do you know that? Someone's out there and writes the check for 80 cents and somehow you've violated federal crime. Or consider how a 1-year penalty and penalty and monetary fine could apply if someone allows his cattle, horses, hogs, or other livestock on federal land for the purposes of destroying the grass or trees. Also, for the purposes of destroying the grass or trees. These laws are concerning because they make Americans felons for nonviolent, innocuous behavior. So these are the kinds of things that I think that we're trying to address. The mens rea element is important, and I think that it's critically important that we have it without waiting to count the crimes. With that, I don't know if the gentleman.
Would the gentleman yield for a question?
Well, the gentleman from Arizona one at a time, with respect to the ranking member.
Yeah, so thanks for yielding. I just want to clarify that in the bill itself, it says any element for which the text of the covered offense makes clear that Congress affirmatively intended not to require the government to prove any state of mind with respect to such element exempts you from the bill. So maybe that should alleviate some of your concern. And then when you get to our witness that you were asserting that he wanted us to count the crimes first, let me read directly from his testimony. So where do we go from here? For years now, my colleagues and I have asked the federal government to count, review, and cut the excess federal crimes in both the U.S. Code and in the CFR. Likewise, we have asked the government to adopt a default mens rea law that would apply some default intent requirement to any federal crime that lacks one. That's what this bill does. It's consistent with what the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers wants, what your witness wanted, what our witness wanted, and now we find you guys kind of changing your tune. Yield back.
I yield back.
Who else seeks recognition? Mr. Raskin, you seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Issa. Yeah, if I understood my friend from Texas correctly, he was basically saying that the job of counting the crimes is literally impossible because it's countless or it's infinite and it'll take forever. But I understand.
I didn't say impossible. I just said difficult and will take some time.
But the legislation calls for the count within 1 year.
I get that.
And
I hope it's successful.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're very close on this, but I think that, to me, it feels a little bit like legislating in the dark to say we're going to go ahead and alter the level of culpability assigned to every criminal statute without even knowing which ones we're talking about.
Would the gentleman yield? I know, and I would have liked to have yielded before, but I'd already agreed to yield to the sponsor.
Yeah.
To the gentleman, because I think we're largely in agreement here. This is not a partisan issue, right? So, I understand the gentleman's concern, but can we just level set on the concerns? Do we not agree that the legislation specifically exempts laws that already have mens rea or have specifically said that we needn't have it?
Would you show me that part? Can we look at that?
I will defer to the sponsor.
Page 5, lines 1 through 8.
Would the timekeeper please suspend the time for a moment?
Yeah, it makes clear that.
And it's the ranking member's time. I've yielded back to him. Yeah.
So, yeah, the prior language says at the bottom of 4, shall not apply with respect to any element for which the text of the covered offense makes clear that Congress affirmatively intended not to require the government to prove any state of mind with respect to such element.
And if the gentleman doesn't think that suffices, then we could try to modify that. But I would think that I read it as sufficing.
Well, what if the Congress affirmatively intended for the government to prove negligence? In other words, negligence is a lower standard of culpability than willfulness, but it's higher than strict liability. So that seems to slip out of there, right? And that there are...
Would you yield for just a question?
Yes.
Say in the text negligently and thus this language would be otherwise sufficient?
Well, that's what I just don't know. I'm not, because negligence is not not acting reasonably. So that's not exactly a state of mind. So yeah.
But as the law professor, when you're teaching the criminal code, for instance, in Maryland, which is very similar to Arizona because they've adopted the Uniform Criminal Code, you're teaching 4 different culpable mental states. That's specific to every state code, and one of those is criminal negligence. One of them is recklessness.
Yes.
One is knowing, and one is intent. So yeah, you're dealing with those culpable mental states, but you're also not talking about strict liability too much because a strict liability statute typically will say it's a strict liability. It will have indicia in it, just like it would on recklessness.
I guess my question for you is negligence a state of mind or is it not a state of mind within the terms of this legislation?
I think that case law is pretty clear that it's treated as a state of mind.
Okay. I guess this is what makes me nervous just about legislating in advance with respect to a number of statutes, and I do want to point out to my friend, this is a minority of statutes. the vast majority of them either have a defined willfulness standard or that's imputed by the courts. So we're talking that it should not be that hard to count these up and look at them, and then we can make a specific judgment about whether negligence or strict liability or some other standard is appropriate. Yeah.
Just two quick points. An example of this would be 18 USC 1115, which talks specifically of, say, misconduct or negligence. It says it in there, but that's the statutory. So when you reference and you say it shouldn't be that hard, ask Congressional Service, CRS, ask them, why don't you, how many statutory vis-a-vis regulatory crimes there are. And they told us multiple times when we asked, there's more than 300,000. They have no idea how many there are. And that means that to count them within a year, for a year, you're not going to have you won't have a mens rea status in most of those, number one. Number two, when you don't get them all counted within a year, what happens then? You're going to keep doing it that way and still go without a mens rea requirement? That basically everybody who practices in this area has said you need a mens rea standard.
Well, but I guess my response is,
I'm asking unanimous consent. The gentleman have an additional 1 minute without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, I think we should give it a try, and we should see if we can actually inventory the statutes so we can look at them to see what we're talking about, because otherwise, to me, it feels like we're legislating in the dark. It's like we've turned the lights off and then we just say, let's change the culpability standard for all these statutes. We don't even know how many there are or what fields they're in, and we'll do that. And as you know, even the question of legislative intent can be indeterminate and inscrutable sometimes. So even trying to interpret what Congress was thinking may be difficult. And I'm not even clear from this language whether negligence is something that we would hold harmless and free from this process or we would incorporate into it. So again, I don't think we're that far away, and I think we can get this done in this Congress. But, for me, I just don't feel sufficient clarity as to what we're doing. We're saying it's a job so mammoth that we can't even count these laws, and yet then we want to go ahead and legislate with respect to them without studying, the particular dynamics of that legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields back. Who else seeks recognition? Gentleman from Kansas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been listening carefully to this, and it's a bit of a sense of deja vu for me. And I think it was 2009 or 2010, we recodified our criminal code in the state of Kansas. I was in the state Senate then, and we went through exactly this discussion. Actually, if my memory's right, I think I was the only no vote on recodifying, but it wasn't because of this issue. It had other issues. And I guess I'm a little bit puzzled by the discussion, and maybe I would ask the gentleman from Arizona or from Maryland to help me understand where I'm missing the point here. I'm looking at the amendment in the nature of a substitute, and I'm looking at the top of page 3, lines 1 through 5, which defines the term state of mind and sets out 7 specific states of mind. We have 4 in Kansas, consistent with what the gentleman from Arizona suggested, one of which is negligently. And then I'm looking at the bottom of that page, lines 23, 24, and then the next page, the completion of that paragraph, which I think is the heart of the bill. It sets out a default rule, as I understand the gentleman from Arizona, the gentleman from Texas, that if there isn't a state of mind expressed by the creator of the statute, then the default is knowingly. We could change that for any statute we wanted, but it sets out a default. And I guess my question for the gentleman from Arizona, and this is where I'm puzzled, isn't it the case now that if there is no state of mind expressed in the statute or in the rule or in whatever it is that's being alleged to have been violated, somebody has to fill in the blank on what state of mind applies? And that often occurs in the course of litigation about enforcement or otherwise. And isn't it the case that all this does is have Congress express that if we haven't otherwise expressed a state of mind, the courts are supposed to default to knowingly unless and until we specify otherwise? Isn't that all this bill does? And
if you'll yield.
Please.
That is the intent. And I think that's the way it's written, and I think that's what it is. If if there is a lack of expression in the statutory or regulatory scheme with regard to that crime as to what the culpable mental state's going to be, which we iterate in here, which is consistent with the federal laws, is a little bit odd compared to the state laws, but yeah, then you're going to default to knowingly. Because as Mr. Giancarlo said, he said, if the criminal law extends to accidental violations of arcane policy rules, the person probably doesn't know that they're in violation of the crime. And thus, the old axiom, ignorance of the law is no defense, goes down the toilet. He didn't say down the toilet, that's me saying. But the point is, yeah, that's why it's there. And you're exactly right, that's the nub of it.
So, Mr. Chairman, reclaiming my time, just to be sure I understand for the gentleman from Arizona. So in the event we had a current law crime, say an environmental crime, which is the classic example here, that is strict liability, and if Congress has said this is a strict liability crime, nothing in this bill changes that. Isn't that correct? And I would yield to the gentleman.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And
Would the gentleman yield?
absolutely.
For the ranking member as he goes through this, is it really just that you need further clarification of, you're not objecting to the default, but you're objecting to a basis under which it would be considered absent?
Yeah, thank you. And to go to the gentleman's question, I understood the current rule to be that the courts will say, if there's silence in the statute, that willfulness is the general standard now, so that knowledge or deliberate purposeful action are already required. I understood the purpose of this bill to to basically take away from the court the ability to determine whether there was legislative intent to the contrary, because it's a regulatory statute, an environmental statute, or what have you. And so we would run over the normal rules of judicial interpretation and statutory construction that a court would be deploying. And that's why I think we should look more specifically at what the statutes are. I believe if all the legislation is intended to do is what the gentleman from Arizona said, I think that's already the law. That is, courts will say, if there's no telling what it is, then given the doctrine of lenity and due process, it must be shown that the person acted with specific intent, with at least knowledge, with respect to every element of the offense. And what makes me nervous is just that there are lots of different elements in any particular offense. Take, environmental offense like dumping in a river. Are we saying there's got to be knowledge that what you put in was toxic? Do you have to show that there was knowledge that this was a waterway covered by federal law? Does there need to be knowledge that the effect of this would be a harm to the public health? Which elements of the offense does the level of culpability carry over to? And I just feel like we're making one big decision for every statute right now without even looking at how it would affect particular laws.
I thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in opposition to this bill. Let's not get caught up in the weeds on this. There is a lot of verbiage in the legislation that can be confusing, particularly to lay people. But what doesn't confuse lay people is the time that we're living in. The time that we're living in now, and why this legislation would come forward during this time, a time of unprecedented corruption at the top levels of government, and at a time where Congress has shirked its responsibility to be a check and balance on the executive branch, and instead is simply a rubber stamp to an authoritarian. And this authoritarian with a playbook, Project 2025, knows exactly what he wants from Congress, and Congress so far has been pretty complicit in carrying out his bidding. And as a former criminal defense attorney, I might seem like an easy yes on this bill, but this bill is not about giving everyone a fair shot in the justice system. No, this bill is about aiding the Trump administration's continued efforts to let white-collar criminals off the hook. And by the way, I'd be remiss for not pointing out the lawlessness of this president when the first day he's in office, he grants pardons and clemency to 1,600 plus January 6 insurrectionists without regard to culpability, without regard to knowledge and intent. He just did that and has continued to do it throughout his reign so far. Trump's Department of Justice has also gutted the top anti-corruption unit in the Department of Justice. They've removed its power to charge politicians and public officials for bribery and extortion, and reduced its staff from 30 attorneys down to 5. And I would also be remiss if I were not to point out the fact that this administration, which leads this Congress, also let a criminal defendant off the hook for a promise to open up Rikers Island, to carry out deportations, the mass deportation movement. Just closed down that case just for that purpose. A lawless administration. The Trump administration also disbanded anti-corruption task forces, suspended any investigations of United States companies for alleged corruption overseas, and directed prosecutors to stop litigating fraud involving cryptocurrency. And again, involve this administration in cryptocurrency along with this Congress. This bill is just a handout to Trump's cronies who do not want to be charged with crimes like tax evasion as we pass a massive tax cut for the wealthy at the expense of the poor. It's a giveaway to corporate fat cats who want to line their pockets by polluting our air and our water to cut their costs. And if we hamstring the government's ability to charge these corporations for things like environmental crimes, big business will increase their profits by dumping more toxic waste into water, and Americans will pay with their health when these chemicals cause cancer, but you won't have a health system to get treated by because they're cutting Medicaid, they're cutting Medicare, and as a result of withdrawing that much money, trillions of dollars, $1.5 trillion from our healthcare system, hospitals and clinics and doctors' offices are going to be closing. So while these polluters are let off the hook criminally, the people will suffer. So let's look at this bill holistically. Let's look at it at this time when it's being introduced, and let's ask ourselves, why now? This is not a serious effort. I'm in favor of bipartisan criminal justice reform, but this is not it, and I urge my colleagues to oppose this bill, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you. Before we seek further recognition, I've been informed by the ranking member that if the proponent would work with them in good faith to go over cases that have already been decided, that are in case law, that may genuinely give an opportunity for a friendly amendment on the floor, that they'd be willing to bring this to a close for today, and then we'd move the bill and move on. Would the gentleman opine on that, please?
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to let the last commentators.
It didn't happen, so please continue.
Don't pretend it didn't happen because it's so idiotic. But
That's just impossible to do at this point. The bill has already been rung, and I'm glad to have rung it, and I'll continue
The gentleman
to
is
ring
not
it.
recognized. Please continue.
Yeah, thank you. I would just point out to the ranking member, I think his concerns are assuaged on page 5 of the ANS where it talks about any element of a covered offense to the extent that applying subsections B2 and BC to and C to such element would lessen the degree of mental culpability the government is required to prove with respect to that element under either a precedent of the Supreme Court of the United States or any other provision of this title or an act of Congress. I'm willing to work in good faith. I'm not sure, you're going to have to designate someone, Mr. Ranking Member, who can work in good faith, because the aspersions made about this bill, which were so absurd by the gentleman from Georgia, makes me call into question. I don't question you, Mr. Ranking Member, because I think you and I could work in good faith to see if there's an issue that we can resolve. But otherwise,
I thank the gentleman for just a moment. The Ranking Member.
So there's a Supreme Court case called United States versus Excitement Video, which found that there's a standard presumption in favor of a scienter requirement, which is a specific intent requirement, which is purposefulness, willfulness, knowledge, okay? Unless there's a contrary congressional intent that's been indicated. So that's, I think, the burden of the legislation, and I think it's the current law. The part that's making me nervous is congressional intent with respect to prior statutes. So say you're in a field where traditionally Congress has understood that the courts will treat it as a strict liability offense, say a dumping offense in the environmental field, but they don't specify it. So it's no longer in the language of the statute because the Congress has taken it for granted that the courts will interpret it this way. It seems to me that the bill at that point would override it because of the silence of the statute on the question. And that's why I'm going to want to look at it. And, you know, the chairman's very kind to suggest that maybe we could work it out. The problem is that because of the proliferation of statutes, we don't know exactly what we're talking about. And that's why I feel so strongly about the bipartisan bill we've got to count the crimes, to put them in front of us so we could check it out. But I'm certain at the end of the day, we're going to get to the same place on this.
I believe that's an offer by the Ranking Member to work directly between now and the time this bill comes to the floor. Does the gentleman agree to that?
I'm certainly willing to talk. And
I appreciate that. In that case, the question is on the adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute. This will be followed immediately by a vote on reporting the bill. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the substitute is adopted. The question is on favorably reporting the bill as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the bill is reported favorably to the House. Members will have...
I request a recorded vote, Mr. Chairman.
The Ranking Member requests a reported vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Jordan? Yes. Mr. Jordan votes yes. Mr. Issa?
Yes.
Mr. Issa votes yes. Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes aye. Mr. McClintock? Mr. McClintock votes aye. Mr. Tiffany? Mr. Massey? Mr. Roy? Aye. Mr. Roy votes aye. Mr. Fitzgerald? Mr. Fitzgerald votes aye. Mr. Klein? Mr. Gooden? Mr. Van Drew? Yes. Mr. Van Drew votes yes. Mr. Nels? Mr. Moore? Mr. Moore votes yes. Mr. Kiley? Ms. Hageman? Ms. Lee? Mr. Hunt? Mr. Fry? Mr. Grothman? Mr. Knott?
Aye.
Mr. Knott votes aye. Mr. Harris? Aye. Mr. Harris votes aye. Mr. Onder? Aye. Mr. Onder votes aye. Mr. Schmidt?
Aye.
Mr. Schmidt votes aye. Mr. Gill? Aye. Mr. Gill votes aye. Mr. Baumgartner? Aye. Mr. Baumgartner votes aye. Mr. Raskin? No. Mr. Raskin votes no. Mr. Nadler? No. Mr. Nadler votes no. Ms. Lofgren? Ms. Lofgren votes no. Mr. Cohen? Mr. Johnson? Mr. Johnson votes no. Mr. Swalwell? Mr. Liu? Mr. Liu votes no. Ms. Jayapal? Mr. Correa? Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon votes no. Mr. Neguse? Ms. McBath? Ms. McBath votes no. Ms. Ross? No. Ms. Ross votes no. Ms. Ballant? Ms. Ballant votes no. Mr. Garcia? Mr. Garcia votes no. Ms. Kamlager-Dove? Ms. Kamlager-Dove votes no. Mr. Moskowitz? Mr. Moskowitz votes no. Mr. Goldman? Ms. Crockett? Ms. Jayapal, you are not recorded. Ms. Jayapal votes no. Mr. Gooden? Mr. Gooden votes yes.
Clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 15 ayes and 13 noes.
The amendment nature substitute is adopted. The ayes have it, and the bill is ordered to be reported favorably to the House. Members will have 2 days to submit views. Without objection, the bill will be reported as a single amendment in the nature of a substitute incorporating all adopted amendments, and staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes. Pursuant to notice, I call up H.R. 98, Endless Criminal Statutes Act for purpose of markup. I move that the committee report it favorably to the House. The clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 98.
Without objection, the bill be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad at least there's comity in the sense that we have too many federal crimes. According to one study, the average American commits 3 felonies per day, which does not consider the overwhelming number of misdemeanors or civil violations. In some instances, the laws are so obscure and vague that even law enforcement and federal agencies are unaware that they exist. The American people should not be burdened with frivolous and unnecessary federal laws they don't even know exist. So I appreciate my colleagues have said they want to just wait until we've counted all these. This bill is just to highlight several of these most egregious and crazy felonies that exist there and to eliminate them. That's what you can do. You can eliminate some of those crimes. So here's what you're going to be eliminating. Writing a check for less than $1. And I understand that my colleague, Mr. McClintock, he routinely tips with a check for under $1. That's not true. That's not true, yeah. Number 2, selling or possessing colored oleomargarine or colored margarine unless they are packaged and labeled or served in a triangular shape. Discarding produce without sufficient cause or making a false report concerning that produce. Removing a stamp from any mail matter. Making metal coins of original design or attempting to use such coins. Detaining a seaman's clothing. Boarding any vessel about to arrive at her destination before such arrival is actually complete. And the last one here, sledding on the Capitol grounds when the Capitol Police are directed to prevent any portion of the Capitol grounds from being used as a playground. These are absurdist, overreach, they're crimes, and this bill would repeal those. It's that simple. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Raskin, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as I understand the gentleman's legislation, it's an attempt to preempt or perhaps foreshadow what might happen once we actually pass the Count the Crimes Act. At that point, we would be able to make a holistic, comprehensive judgment about certain statutes which maybe should just be retired completely. We should repeal them. They should be altered. They should be subsumed. They should be merged or what have you. It looks like, if I'm understanding the gentleman correctly, he's gone through some of them and is intending to make a handful of changes to them. And again, we think this is putting the cart before the horse. Let's actually engage in the process that's called for by the Count the Crimes to Cut Act of 2025. Let's do it in a systematic and thorough way. We've not done a specific study of the legislative history of these particular statutes. We've not done a study, at least I've not done a study of the case law that's arisen out of them. I don't know that there are specific emergency problems relating to any of them, and I would rather not sidetrack us from the main job here, which is let's try to look at the entire thing. And in reaching out to the 7 different committees who have expertise in the specific subject matter affected by this bill and particular provisions, we've heard concerns that the bill would do more harm than good. We understand the legislation is opposed by the U.S. Capitol Police, the architect of the Capitol, and the maritime unions. I don't know why. Those are just the few that we've heard from about these. Again, I'd rather proceed in a methodical, systematic, and comprehensive way rather than take a scattershot approach.
Would
And so
would
for
the
that reason-
gentleman yield?
Yes, I'm happy to yield.
I just wanted to.
I think it's opening statement.
Oh, it's opening
I'm
statement.
so
I'll be
sorry.
happy to, that's all right.
I'm so sorry.
I would have liked to have yielded, but I'm going to yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
We'll get to all
Yep.
that. I think the gentleman is recognized. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Arizona to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute.
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report.
Amendment in the nature of a
Without objection, the
substitute.
amendment in the nature of a substitute will be considered as read and shall be considered base text for the purpose of amendment. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Arizona to explain the amendment.
I think we just made a technical change or two in here, and it's otherwise the same.
Okay, now, who seeks recognition? The gentlelady from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just, as a former chair of the House Administration Committee with oversight over the Capitol Police, I wanted to briefly address the issue, the sledding issue, because as I understand it, the bill actually repeals 2 U.S.C. 1963, which states, "It shall be the duty of the Capitol Police on and after April 29th, 1876, to prevent any portion of the Capitol grounds and terraces from being used as playgrounds or otherwise, so far as may be necessary, to protect the public property, turf, and grass from destruction or injury." I think the repeal of the statute actually does more than what is intended, which is to let, when it snows, to let people on Capitol Hill go with their kids and sled down the hill. Everybody thinks that's fine, but I think the statute provides authority for the Capitol Police to take additional steps to secure the facility. And I think that would be a mistake. We all know that the threat level is very high. It's not the sledders that we're worried about, but there are other threats that the Capitol Police need to be able to anticipate and protect us from. So I think I'm concerned about this provision, and I'm also concerned, I represent an area with well, it's the lettuce bowl of the world. I mean, Salinas Valley produces most of the lettuce and spinach consumed in the United States. What would be making a false report concerning produce constitute? There's a very intricate system set up that is supported by health officials as well as growers to identify problematic produce. I mean, it's, you know, you can get a toxic in produce, you know, despite your best efforts. You know, birds fly overhead and you know, poop on the lettuce, and you can't necessarily, you know, protect against that, and yet it could have a health implication. So I would like to know a lot more about this before I could say yes to it, in addition to the Capitol Police issue. And with that, Mr.
Would the gentlelady yield?
I would be happy to yield.
Thank you so much for that detailed microscopic inspection of what this big bill would do with respect to that particular law, because I think there are 9 or 10 different laws that would be affected in the same way. The gentleman started off with the reference to writing a check for less than $1. And again, we haven't studied this, we haven't had a hearing on about it, so I'm just reading from the language of the statute, but the statute itself appears to be about counterfeiting. Whoever makes, issues, circulates, or pays out any note, check, memorandum, token, or other obligation for a less sum than $1 intended to circulate as money or to be received or used in lieu of lawful money shall be fined or imprisoned under this title. So I don't think that the intended prohibited conduct is writing a check for less than $1. It's counterfeiting for less than $1. And again, I don't know the legislative history to determine why they needed to do it for under $1. Maybe it was $1 and above, and then people were creating false coins, counterfeit coins, or what have you. In any event, we haven't studied it, we haven't looked at it, and that's the problem with putting the cart before the horse. That is, rushing to get to the end of this process. Believe me, I'm as eager as all of my colleagues to find out, you know, all of the unnecessary, antiquated, outmoded, outdated, obsolete, obsolescent laws that are out there. Let's get it done. Let's go through it. Let's repeal the ones that we no longer need. Let's merge the ones that can be merged, and let's keep the ones or improve the ones that we don't. But The problem is that we haven't done the study yet.
Reclaiming my time, the gentleman raises an additional issue, which is it's less than $1, but what would be the impact on crypto that declines in value? I think that's, we're in a big debate on what to do in regulatory mode on the crypto industry. We rely very heavily on the Financial Services Committee for guidance on that, and I don't know what the answer is, but I think it's a provocative question without an answer at this point. And additional, some of the other things I think, look reasonable, but, we don't want to, we don't want to make a mistake. And I think, the bipartisan bill to actually do the analysis within a year would make sure that we don't do mistaken effort. So with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California is recognized.
I thank the chairman. I'm going to speak briefly in favor of this and tell a little story. When I came to Congress, one of my classmates that entered the same year was Jeff Flake, who had headed up the Goldwater Institute, went on to be a senator and then an ambassador. And then Congressman Flake used to go to the House floor to the chagrin of people, including Zoe Lofgren and myself, and he would find the most obscure grants that threw money at things. I remember one time it was a study to look at the effects of malt liquor and marijuana on college co-eds. Now, there were some who thought that it needed to be studied further, but none of us that went to college had any doubt. But he found these. He once found one about the perfect Christmas tree, to the chagrin of the North Carolina delegation. Each time we voted those on the floor, the one thing we discovered was there was merit to finding anecdotal examples of things that were not necessary. And Congressman Flake said to me one time, well, I used the there but for standard. There but for this grant, there but for this bill, would we somehow have a disaster? And I would take, for example, here today, there but for a specific rule on the ability to stop sledding in these winters we no longer seem to have enough of for sleds to occur, but there but for, would the Capitol Police be unable to stop sledders? There but for, are there no other rules or regulations, duplicates, triplicates, that would allow the Coast Guard to stop somebody from doing something nefarious before the ship lands? And the answer is, of course, we could go through each of these, but I think all of them would pass the there but for this bill. You would still be able to, or be unable to name an offense that wouldn't be covered by a host of other laws. And so I'm going to vote for this, not because it's a big bill. Matter of fact, to my gentleman from Arizona and my friend, this is about the smallest request I've ever seen come out of him. This is really so much low-hanging fruit, because these are the bills that are a starting point for why do we need to have duplicates, triplicates, quadruplicates. It is the reason that often people don't know there's a law about it. When I first came to Congress, they usually talked about Catholics doing something in New York on Sundays or something that was still on the books. But for all the young people that have been pointed out here today, we don't do enough elimination of obsolete regulations, obsolete laws, because they are burdensome. And I do support, along with my colleague from Arizona and others here, I do support the idea that we should have the study done. We should see, to the greatest extent possible, the additional items. But don't let the perfect that is your goal, the 300,000 you want to eliminate, stand in the way of looking at each of these and asking the simply, there but for this law, is there somehow a criminal, a terrible, heinous crime that will not be punished or prevented? And I think you'll find that basically, there but for these bills, we could still, in fact, punish them. Would the gentleman from Arizona concur with that?
Yes, well said. And the only thing I would add is that when I hear that we haven't studied this or we didn't have a hearing on this, we actually did May 7th. We had a hearing on this bill with witnesses, And
didn't they noted some of the ones you brought up?
they indeed noted these right here. Thank you.
Will the gentleman yield?
Of course I would yield. Yes.
So basically if I interpreted your statement, we should be able to secure the Capitol without criminalizing sledding. Is that correct?
That's correct. The authority for the Capitol Police, quite frankly, to escort anyone other than members with their pins off the grounds exists already. They have complete authority. And it is a crime not to obey a Capitol policeman who tells you to leave. I remember a special select committee that studied that in detail not long ago.
Yield back.
And with that, I yield back.
Gentlelady from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do want to associate myself with the remarks of Ranking Member Raskin. I agree that we do need real solutions to address the harms of overcriminalization and mass incarceration that particularly fall on the communities of color and affect all of us by eroding trust in our criminal justice system. We should always be looking for bipartisan, evidence-based solutions to make our community safer. And this legislation to repeal 9 completely unrelated criminal provisions clearly fails to meet this standard. Ranking Member Raskin highlighted a few of the provisions that this bill would actually repeal, and I would like to address another. This bill would repeal Section 1963 of Title II, a provision dating back to 1876 that actually I'm going to quote for you. It says, "It shall be the duty of the Capitol Police on and after April 29, 1876, to prevent any portion of the Capitol grounds and terraces from being used as playgrounds or otherwise, so far as may be necessary to protect the public property, turf, and grass from destruction or injury," end quote. The findings section of the bill and press releases in support of it emphasize that the reason to repeal this provision is to decriminalize sledding. But this language doesn't include sledding at all, and it doesn't criminalize any particular activity. Rather, it instructs the Capitol Police to protect the Capitol grounds. Congress enacted this law, the Turf Protection Act, following the destruction of the grass after 10,000 children came to play and roll Easter eggs on the grass. While acknowledging that it was a joy to watch the kids, senators noted that the crowds were particularly damaging to the sloped areas of grass and that the damage done cost thousands of dollars to repair. They don't cite a specific cost, but $1,000 in 1876 is equivalent to about $30,000 today. So we're talking about a big cost to taxpayers then and now. One senator noted that the grounds were also damaged by frequent cattle crossings and argued it was important to give police the duty to prevent them and to protect the monuments across the Capitol grounds. The Turf Protection Act was passed, and the tradition that eventually became the official White House Easter egg roll moved across the mall to a flat lawn that was less susceptible to damage. Today, Capitol Police no longer have to prevent cows from coming across the lawn, but they still rely on this authority to protect the Capitol grounds in a wide variety of ways. They use this authority to promulgate regulations that prohibit skateboarding, ice skating, kite flying, and the use of model airplanes, model cars, and drones on the Capitol grounds, as well as to control concerts and special events. These regulations protect the grounds from damage. They promote safety, public safety for people in cars and pedestrians, and even security implications. These regulations do prohibit sledding, but as the press release for this bill readily acknowledges, the sledding prohibition is not enforced because annual appropriations report language typically directs Capitol Police not to enforce it. It is our understanding that both the Capitol Police and the architect of the Capitol oppose this legislation because they're but for repealing this law, which has been in place for almost 150 years, would limit this ability to protect the grounds and leave them with no recourse if damage occurs. Since the bill's sponsor agrees that no one is convicted of sledding, this bill is a solution in search of a problem when it comes to sledding, and importantly, it is no solution at all with respect to overcriminalization and mass incarceration. I oppose this legislation, and I encourage my
Would the gentleman
colleague-
yield?
Yes, I yield.
I'd just like to thank you for that history lesson. It was very interesting. I think, mostly, we could say sledding should be permitted unless the police feel that there's a security issue that would prevent it. That would be something we could all agree to. But the fact that the Capitol Police, charged with protecting us, oppose this should be a warning to us that this is more problematic than it's being discussed. And I'm sure that that's not the intent of the author, but we ought to pay attention to the law enforcement people who oppose this while understanding we're not opposed to the sledding. And I thank the gentlelady for yielding.
Absolutely. I think we ought to pay attention to law enforcement. They are here to protect and serve this Capitol, and every single one of us here every day. And with that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Who seeks recognition? Mr. Johnson? Or the gentleman from Florida, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was listening to the ranking member talking about, like going through things and doing like a comprehensive review. And then it dawned on me that Governor Biggs had accomplished something big today, which was this is the first bill they've brought on efficiency. Took 6 months to do efficiency, talked a lot about efficiency. So I just want to congratulate Representative Biggs and the Republicans for finally doing something efficient. You're shrinking some statutes. It's small, but you got to start someplace. I mean, Lord knows you didn't make the Newark airport more efficient, or FEMA, or Congress. No, so I just wanted to give you your moment, that you're leading it off, and I think the folks in Arizona can look forward to this leadership for you on efficiency.
Will you yield?
Sure.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate the acknowledgement that this bill is making things more efficient. I do find it ironic, though, that all the Democrats oppose that kind of efficiency, and it's actually par for the course.
Reclaiming my time, we can disagree on how we make things more efficient, right? But I want to congratulate you that finally a Republican has said enough of this inefficiency we've been doing for 6 months. I finally want to do what we said we were going to do that we haven't done for 6 months. But now today's the day. So I just wanted to congratulate the governor. I think this will be a big part of his platform about trying to find ways where we can make government better for the people. So thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Real quickly, couldn't let it go. We mentioned Newark Airport. The problems in Newark Airport, just to be accurate though, and we're kind of having fun today with all of us, were there. I mean, when the responsibility of Newark Airport for air traffic control was shifted from New York to Philadelphia, back in the previous administration, they didn't make sure that the proper fiber optic was there. They had decaying copper. They had issues. They didn't have the STARS program, and they were not ready to deal with this increase in air traffic. So those problems, it's one thing, a problem can actually, rear its ugly head in one administration, but all and everything that led up to the issues there, including not the proper funding for the FAA that went on through a number of years in the past administration as well, were all there, all caused by the previous administration, and just to be accurate, had nothing to do with efficiency or lack of it.
Would the gentleman yield?
I yield.
It's funny because if we're going back to the previous administration, the administration before that, right, this 2 administrations ago, they had like infrastructure week every week, never passed an infrastructure bill, never did anything for any of the airports in America, even though we were always celebrating infrastructure week. So if we're gonna say previous administrations led us up to that point, America was not founded in the 2020 election.
I will reclaim my time, and let me say that's why the gentleman from Florida should be, as Hubert Humphrey used to say way before our time, pleased as punch that right now there's a record amount of money going into the FAA, and that all of these infrastructure issues are going to be dealt with, and all the modernization needs to be done will be dealt with as well. So I'm sure the gentleman is pleased at that. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from, I thought the gentleman from Georgia was trying to get in there. Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in opposition to this legislation. We've charged the Trump administration, which, by the way, I have reason to believe gives clearance to the meeting agendas in House committees under Republican control in this rubber stamp Congress. I'm sure that before these measures come to our attention, that they have to be cleared by the Almighty. I have reason to believe that that is the case, and so the Almighty is in support of endless criminal statutes, the act. Why would the Almighty be in favor of this act at this time, this act which seeks to address criminal statutes like writing a check for less than $1? Well, writing a bad check or a fraudulent check for less than $1, that should have some consequences. And I don't, you can write 1 million checks, you can write 1 billion checks for $1. You should be held accountable for writing 1 billion checks, just as you should be accountable for writing 1 bad check, even though it's for $1. But under this unprecedented corruption that we're seeing today, nothing is out of the question in terms of illegality, how far the Almighty will go in terms of illegality. Would he remove a stamp from any mail matter, which is another example given in this legislation that they want to rescind that criminal law? Making metal coins of original design, does that sound crypto to you? Making metal coins of original design like a meme coin, or attempting to use such coins, making that legal. That's what this legislation would do, in addition to other, quote, efficiencies that the bill is introduced to address. These inefficiencies include some laws that have real consequences, such as reducing the safety of our food and possibly allowing counterfeiters to go unpunished. Rather than poking fun at federal laws, we should be serious in this endeavor. Let us have a study on whether these crimes are being charged. Let's talk to the relevant committees of jurisdiction, and let's look at it more holistically than what we're doing with just passing this legislation. Clearly, these offenses are not the primary drivers of overcriminalization and mass incarceration. I would love to work on bigger problems like mandatory minimum sentences, prison overcrowding and understaffing, insufficient resources for rehabilitation, or the many ways in which people are inappropriately funneled into the criminal justice system instead of being offered mental health treatment, drug treatment, or housing assistance. So let us focus on the real drivers of mass incarceration instead of passing a bill that has not been appropriately discussed or studied. I will oppose this bill. I hope my colleagues will join me in opposition, and with that,
Would the gentleman yield?
I will yield to.
Thank you for that very thoughtful statement, Mr. Johnson. I very much appreciate your perspective on it. Look, in the last 10 or 15 minutes, we've talked about snowball fights on the Capitol. We've talked about writing 99-cent checks. We've talked about selling or possessing colored oleo margarine or margarine packaged in a certain way. if I were back in Annapolis in the state legislature, they would cut this off as not within a single subject rule, because we're talking about 10 different things. And so I appreciate the spirit with which it's brought forward to demonstrate to people that there are some laws which may be antiquated, which might need to be updated or scrapped altogether. But this is not the proper process that we should be pursuing to study that. We should get all those together, do a systematic inventory. If we can do one big omnibus bill, great. But if not, as the gentleman from Georgia said, what we're doing is violence to whatever the legislative history that led up to those particular things. And the committees of jurisdiction don't know anything about the fact that we're considering these bills. Yield back and thank the gentleman.
I yield back.
I move to strike the last question.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was looking at the title of this bill, End Endless Criminal Statutes Act. And I thought, all right, could be a real serious effort to streamline our criminal code. It obviously is not. It's somewhat silly that we're dealing with these things, which I am almost positive have never been charged. And we're not actually evaluating the crimes, the serious crimes that are out there that are not being charged. One such crime that is not mentioned here, that was historically not charged, is Title 8, Section, the U.S. Code, Section 1325, which is a misdemeanor for illegally entering the country. Traditionally, that is always dealt with by the immigration courts, but not under the most recent administration, former administration, but the one before that, when the current president was also the president. All of a sudden, that criminal provision was used repeatedly, and it was used solely so that criminal law enforcement agents could arrest people entering the country who have had no crime other than they entered the country, which understandably, there's a good argument they should not have done that, and that's why the immigration courts have dealt with that traditionally. But by being arrested, they were then put in a criminal jail, not immigration detention. And you cannot go into a criminal jail with your family. You have to go separately. And so this was how the family and child separation policy was executed, by using a previously unused misdemeanor statute, not designed to actually penalize anyone, but really designed as part of a policy to separate families. So I don't know why we're dealing with these 9 things when, I would be happy to bet Mr. Biggs lunch at the members' dining room that none of these have been charged. But we're not dealing with other statutes that are not being charged but should be, such as the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which I'm sure my colleagues on the other side of the aisle know is a primary statute used very frequently by the Department of Justice to prevent companies doing business in the United States from bribing foreign governments in order to get business. Now, that seems like an important statute. We should not be condoning and supporting companies doing business in America, including American companies, from using bribery to get business. It would seem that would be the type of corruption that the United States has traditionally discouraged and even threatened other countries to address and to deal with in order to have our support, because it is, of course, anti-democratic. And yet this administration has actually made an announcement, an actual policy decision that it is not going to charge the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. It is given license to any company doing business in America to bribe foreign governments to get business. It is condoning and supporting bribery, which is not surprising given how much, if bribery, the President of the United States is receiving for who knows what, we don't know. But the degree of corruption and grifting in this administration and supported by this administration seems much more serious than whether we're selling or possessing margarine or sledding on the Capitol grounds. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on the adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute. This will be followed immediately by a vote on reporting the bill. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment in the nature of a substitute is adopted. The question is on favorably reporting the bill as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Can we have a recorded vote, please, Mr. Chairman?
The ranking member requesting a recorded vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Jordan?
Yes.
Mr. Jordan votes yes. Mr. Issa? Mr. Issa votes yes. Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes aye. Mr. McClintock? Mr. McClintock votes aye. Mr. Tiffany? Mr. Massey? Yes. Mr. Massey votes yes. Mr. Roy? Aye. Mr. Roy votes aye. Mr. Fitzgerald? Mr. Klein? Mr. Gooden? Mr. Gooden votes yes. Mr. Van Drew?
Yes.
Mr. Van Drew votes yes. Mr. Nels? Mr. Moore? Mr. Moore votes yes. Mr. Kiley? Ms. Hageman? Ms. Lee? Mr. Hunt? Mr. Fry? Mr. Grothman? Mr. Grothman votes aye. Mr. Knott? Mr. Knott votes aye. Mr. Harris? Mr. Harris votes aye. Mr. Onder? Mr. Onder votes aye. Mr. Schmidt? Mr. Gill? Mr. Gill votes yes. Mr. Baumgartner? Mr. Raskin? Mr. Raskin votes no. Mr. Nadler? Mr. Nadler votes no. Ms. Lofgren? Ms. Lofgren votes no. Mr. Cohen? Mr. Johnson? Mr. Johnson votes no. Mr. Swalwell? Mr. Liu? Mr. Liu votes no. Ms. Jayapal? Mr. Correa? Ms. Scanlon? Ms. Scanlon votes no. Mr. Neguse? Ms. McBath? Ms. McBath votes no. Ms. Ross? Ms. Ross votes no. Ms. Ballant? Ms. Ballant votes no. Mr. Garcia? Mr. Garcia votes no. Ms. Kamlager-Dove? Ms. Kamlager-Dove votes no. Mr. Moskowitz? Mr. Goldman? Mr. Goldman votes no. Ms. Crockett? Mr. Baumgartner? Mr. Baumgartner votes aye. Ms. Crockett? Ms. Crockett votes no.
Is that the one?
Ms. Hageman, you are not recorded. Yes. Ms. Hageman votes yes.
We're good, right? Ms. Jayapal?
Ms. Jayapal, you are not recorded. Ms. Jayapal votes no.
Clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 16 ayes and 14 noes.
The ayes have it, and the bill is ordered to be reported favorably to the House. Members will have 2 days to submit views. Without objection, the bill will be reported as a single amendment in the nature of a substitute, incorporating all adopted amendments, and staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes. Pursuant to notice, I call up H.R. 2159, the Count the Crimes to Cut Act of 2025 for purpose of markup, and move that the committee report it favorably to the House. The clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 215.
Without objection, the bill will be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The bill before us today, H.R. 2159, the Count the Crimes to Cut Act of 2025, is common sense and happens to be bipartisan. For decades, the American people Congress and certain corners of the federal government have tried to grasp a reliable estimate of how many criminal laws exist, either in statute or regulation. In the 1980s, the Department of Justice tried to count the number of federal criminal laws within the U.S. Code and estimated there are about 3,000. In 1998, the American Bar Association attempted to count the criminal offenses, said it was likely higher than 3,000, but to complete the task with accuracy, quote, is likely to prove futile and inaccurate. In other words, the DOJ and the ABA stopped counting due to the likely near endless quantity of criminal laws on the books. In the nearly early 2000s, retired Professor Dr. John Baker from LSU estimated the U.S. Code contains more than 4,000 offenses. In 2008, he updated it to 4,450. In 2019, the U.S. Code estimated at 5,199, according to the Heritage Foundation and the Mercatus Center. Additionally, there are estimated to be thousands of criminal offenses, many buried in regulatory codes. For context, there are an estimated 300,000 federal regulations that carry criminal offenses that could put an American citizen in prison. These 300,000 regulations with criminal penalties were created through the regulatory process, not drafted and deliberated by Congress, bypassing accountability. In some instances, the laws are so obscure and vague that even law enforcement and federal agencies are unaware they exist. It's no wonder why the issue of criminalization has drawn concern from my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. Every American faces the potential of unknowingly violating these federal statutes at any given moment, only to be met with the DOJ charging them with vague or bogus statute. This must end. The American people and Congress deserve to have a proper accounting. This bill, the Count the Crimes to Cut Act of 2025, is a prudent and necessary step toward restoring clarity, accountability, and proportionality in the federal criminal justice system. It requires the Attorney General to provide Congress with a list of all federal crimes in statute and regulation, along with pertinent information such as the potential criminal penalty, the mens rea requirements for the offense, and the DOJ prosecutorial history of the statute. Fundamental to the rule of law is the idea that individuals must have reasonable notice of what conduct is prohibited. Publishing a complete index of federal criminal offenses supports due process by ensuring Congress and the public have access to this information. By requiring detailed information on prosecution history, criminal penalties, and mens rea requirements, Congress can identify where reform is most needed. As James Madison said in Federalist 61, when fundamental principles of representative government and the importance of accessible and understandable laws, quote, it will be of little avail to the people that the laws are made by men of their own choice if the laws are so voluminous that they cannot be read, or so incoherent that they cannot be understood, if they be repealed or revised before they are promulgated, or undergo such incessant changes that no man who knows what the law is today can guess what it will be tomorrow. That was Madison. That was 250 years ago. Here we are, and we have a complex code that a large number of the American people have no idea that the behavior in which they are engaging is potentially criminal. And I believe, and a couple more points to this, I don't want this legislation, though, to be cover for not taking other actions. I take as sincere the concerns that have been expressed already about mens rea or eliminating certain statutes. But if we wait around to study it endlessly, we're not going to act. I would suggest that we ought to be taking action, and I think this should apply across the board. I mean, concerns that, this is only going to have some impact on white-collar crimes versus more violent crimes or something along those lines. That's not the point here. I could bring up numerous examples where Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh was inserted himself into saying that the mens rea question with respect to an individual who's involved in a gang dispute as to whether it should be a manslaughter sentence or a murder sentence, secondary murder sentence, 8 years versus 20 years, the mens rea mattered and clarity was needed. There are things like that that are occurring all the time in our criminal justice system, and those of us who are concerned about over-criminalization should be mindful of that. I know it's bipartisan, and I appreciate the support. I appreciate the support of the gentlelady from Georgia, the previous support of the minority leader, Mr. Jeffries, and I believe the support of the ranking member. And so I'm grateful for that. But I do want to be clear that we need to be taking actions besides just the counting. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I want to commend Chairman Roy and Ranking Member McBath and Representative Cohen for their excellent bipartisan work on this legislation. I'm very pleased to support it, and as I've been saying this morning, I think it's the foundation for us moving forward on a whole bunch of the different initiatives and endeavors that we've been exploring today. I agree with my friend from Texas that this should not be an excuse for action, and there's some actions that could be taken right now by the executive branch of government to focus on real crime. Unfortunately, they've been moving in the wrong direction. They keep going after people for engaging in freedom of speech. They keep going after news entities, which the President of the United States has sued. Then the FCC comes after them. Then he gets a private shakedown settlement. The Department of Justice has dismantled the Crypto Capture Task Force. It is dismantled the Foreign Influence Task Force. It's dismantled the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force. So they are actually letting our guard down with respect to real crime while they focus on imaginary crimes and things which are constitutionally not crimes at all, like people engaging in freedom of expression, writing op-eds, attending rallies, and so on. But I agree with my friend about James Madison. The founders envisioned federal criminal law to be limited to national concerns, which is why the vast majority of crimes are prosecuted today at the state and local level, not in the federal government. And I'd like very much the quote that the gentleman from Texas repeated from James Madison about the laws should not be so voluminous that they cannot be read, nor so incoherent that they cannot be understood. There should be simplicity and clarity so people know what is expected of them and what's not, so that there's notice for everybody. This legislation will direct the DOJ and other agencies to compile a comprehensive report detailing every federal statutory and regulatory criminal offense, which have indeed grown substantially over the last several decades. And despite several previous attempts by the Department of Justice, the ABA, and several scholars to determine how many federal offenses there are, no comprehensive accounting exists. And I hope this legislation will cut through it. Our colleagues have described this as something like the 12 labors of Hercules, just to determine how many federal crimes we've got. I was wondering whether artificial intelligence could help. Maybe somebody could just punch into their AI program, if they got it, how many criminal offenses are there at the federal level? Maybe they could begin to point us in the right direction. But in any event, this legislation will finally provide us that comprehensive inventory. We will get the elements of proof, the potential penalties, the mens rea requirements that exist or don't exist, and the number of prosecutions each year for the preceding 15 years for every listed offense that's brought to us. We'll be in a position to thoroughly review the federal criminal law so we can begin to clarify, simplify, streamline, and reduce. And this is indeed, as the Heritage Foundation's Giancarlo Canaparo, one of the Republican witnesses, testified, this will be the first step towards solving the problem of scattered, vague, imprecise, and incoherent criminal laws. So I'm glad we're doing this. I think it is important to point out that there is a move against over-criminalization, over-incarceration, over-prosecution in America. There's a separate agenda, which is to try to wipe out criminal law at all for white-collar criminals who some would like to see free to engage in fraud, embezzlement, corruption, bribery, kickbacks, embezzlement, and so on. That's not the agenda that I'm speaking for today. I'm for the other agenda of making the criminal law fair and equal for everybody in the society, not undercutting the criminal law just for white-collar offenders. With that, I'll yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas to offer an amendment in the nature of substitute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The amendment in the nature of substitute before us simply removes the year from the short title.
Hang on. The gentleman has an amendment at the desk.
Oh, sorry.
Clerk will report.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Without objection, the amendment in the nature of substitute will be considered as read and shall be considered as text for purpose of amendment. The gentleman is now recognized to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The amendment in the nature of substitute before us simply removes the year from the short title. I urge my colleagues to support the amendment. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks recognition? Gentlelady from...
Let's go sponsor first.
I think the sponsor, yeah. Let's go. The gentlelady from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you. The Count the Crimes to Cut Act of 2025 would mandate the creation of a comprehensive inventory of all federal criminal, statutory, and regulatory offenses. I am a proud co-lead of this common sense bipartisan solution that will help us address the pressing issue of overcriminalization, troubling result of the unchecked growth of federal criminal law. For too long, new federal crimes have been created without a full understanding of what crimes already exist. The result, a tangled web of red tape with thousands of crimes, many of which are redundant, overly broad, overlap, intrude into matters traditionally reserved to the states or are unknown to the public. Some federal crimes are so vague that no reasonable person can even understand them. Today, the sheer volume of federal crimes creates risks for well-meaning, law-abiding citizens. Many legal scholars argue that unsuspecting Americans unknowingly commit several crimes a day. I'm sure we're all doing it. Yet we cannot effectively address the problems associated with our bloated patchwork of federal criminal laws until we know the full scope of federal criminalization. Between 1982 and 2019, the number of federal criminal offenses dramatically increased by 73%, from an estimated 3,000 to more than 5,000. While this increase is undoubtedly significant, the true number of existing federal crimes is actually much higher, since many additional crimes are created by federal regulations. And despite several previous attempts to determine the number of criminal offenses currently on the books, the fact is we still don't know. The Count the Crimes to Cut Act is a necessary first step towards smart, data-driven reforms that work. Through this legislation, we can finally learn the true number of federal crimes that exist both by statute and legislation. We will identify the state of mind required by each of these statutes and regulations and find out how these laws are enforced by the Department of Justice, if at all. We will also be able to identify which laws need mens rea reform, which laws already have sufficient intent standards, and which laws cover the same conduct but with different intent standards. We cannot have effective reform of federal criminal laws without first passing and implementing this bill. This is not about making lists. That's not what this bill does. It's about creating the tools that we need for precise, data-driven reform. With concrete data, we can determine exactly which reforms are needed, remove speculation from the process, and avoid unintentional, unnecessary mistakes that could arise from a sweeping one-size-fits-all kind of approach. I thank Chairman Roy for his leadership on this legislation, which will help eliminate redundant laws and allows us to focus on real threats to the safety of Americans, a top priority of mine. And I ask all of my colleagues to support this common sense measure, which is long overdue. And I think it's relevant to note that some of the last times that the laws on the books were actually trying to be counted, the Department of Justice was the 1980s. The American Bar Association, 1998. And such scholars such as Professor John Baker, 2008. And we know to do this is very, very costly, but I think it just makes so much sense to have each relevant federal agency kind of count and report on themselves. We've had many, many laws that have been passed, and as we said, many are ambiguous, and who knows how many laws we have on the books now. This just makes common sense. Let's put things in order, let's set things right, and let's make sure that the process is fair, and let's move forward. And I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. I would just say I appreciate the gentlelady's comments and her co-sponsorship and the work of the subcommittee chair and the ranking member's comments as well. If I remember correctly from the hearing a few weeks ago, there were thousands of laws that were created by Congress, but there were even more created by people who never put their name on a ballot or never directly accountable to we the people. And that to me is the scariest part of all. So this is certainly needed, and I strongly support the legislation and would now recognize the gentleman from Georgia for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I get great pleasure out of opposing bad legislation that comes before this committee. But I get even greater satisfaction by supporting good legislation that comes from this committee, and that's why I rise in support of this bill. In the last 40 years, the number of criminal offenses in the Federal Criminal Code has ballooned from 3,000 in the early 1980s to nearly 4,500 in 2008. This has led to the overuse of criminal law to address societal problems. Some of these crimes contain broad or vague terms, and they are increasingly duplicating or conflicting with state laws that are already on the books. The complex nature of the Federal Criminal Code can lead to confusion and the potential for overcharging. It only makes sense to pass this bill, which would require the Attorney General to compile a report and public index of federal criminal and regulatory offenses. This bill requires a report to the House and Senate committees on the Judiciary, which we could use as a starting point to understand and to address the issues of over-federalization and over-criminalization. And for those reasons, I support the legislation, and with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The question occurs on the adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute. This will be followed immediately by a vote on reporting the bill. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment in the nature of a substitute is adopted. The question is on favorably reporting the bill as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the bill is ordered to be reported favorably to the House. Members will have 2 days to submit views. Without objection, the bill will be reported as a single amendment in the nature of a substitute, incorporating all adopted amendments, and staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes. Pursuant to notice, I call up H.R. 451, the Small Business Regulatory Flexibility Improvements Act, for purpose of markup, and move that the committee report it favorably to the House. The clerk will report the bill. H.R. 451. Clerk will report the bill? Or excuse me, I'm sorry. 421, that's right.
H.R. 421 to amend.
Without objection, the bill be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Klein, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Small Business Regulatory Flexibility Improvements Act is a crucial piece of legislation that will force the administrative state to consider its impact on regulations that regulations have on small businesses. Small businesses across the U.S. are at a disadvantage when complying with burdensome federal regulations. Executive branch agencies in particular frequently issue one-size-fits-all rules that do not adequately account for the unique needs of small businesses. These one-size-fits-all rules cause significant economic harm, raising compliance costs for small businesses and in turn raising prices for consumers. Burdensome regulations also can keep some small businesses out of the market altogether. Facing insurmountable compliance costs, potential entrepreneurs all too often choose not to open their small businesses in the first place, depriving consumers of potentially innovative new products and services. This bill would strengthen the RFA's Regulatory Flexibility Act, already existing provisions, and deter agencies from ignoring their statutory obligations to American small businesses. H.R. 421 requires that agencies convene small business review panels when promulgating all major rules, giving small businesses a chance to voice their concerns about economically harmful regulations. This requirement extends to all agencies, not just the 3 currently required under the RFA. It also requires that agencies account for the indirect costs of the regulations, which include compliance costs. Additionally, H.R. 421 forces the agencies to conduct a more transparent economic analysis when certifying that a proposed rule will not have a significant economic impact on a substantial number of small businesses. And finally, H.R. 421 mandates that all rules as defined under the Administrative Procedure Act, not just notice and comment rulemakings, are covered by the RFA's analysis requirements. Congress passed the RFA in 1980 to combat overburdensome federal regulations, acknowledging the detrimental effects such regulations have on small businesses. But many agencies still do not take the specific needs of small business into account when crafting regulations. This bill is a common sense effort to ensure regulators comply with the RFA's provisions as Congress intended by fully considering the total regulatory impact on small business owners when crafting major rules. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation, and I yield back.
Chair now recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Raskin, for an opening statement.
Thank you kindly, Mr. Chairman. This really isn't the Small Business Regulatory Flexibility Improvement Act, it's the Big Business Regulatory Relief Act. There is indeed broad bipartisan support for small business in Congress. Small businesses include everything from mom and pop stores to budding entrepreneurial ventures, to my grandfather's plumbing business. They are a route by which countless Americans build a better life for their families and grow the economic pie for society. But this isn't about them. Under the guise of helping small business, this bill is another effort to delay, dilute, and derail regulations we have adopted to protect the public health and the public safety for all Americans. Since January, the administration has taken a chainsaw to the agencies that Congress created to protect the interests of the American people. The EPA, which is charged with ensuring that we have clean air, clean land, and clean water, and assessing the safety of chemicals sold in the U.S., faces a proposed budget cut of 54%. The resources it has left are being used to help big coal by exempting nearly 70 coal plants from rules that limit the amount of mercury and other toxins that they can spew into the air. And as for its staff, OMB Director Vaught has proclaimed that he wants its people to be put into trauma. The administration is fighting tooth and nail to shut down the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which protects us from fraud by big banks, credit card companies, credit reporting agencies, loan servicers, debt collectors, payday lenders, and other fraudsters. Who is helped by shutting down this watchdog that has helped more than 200 million American consumers recover more than $21 billion from big financial companies? Despite my colleagues' pro-pollution, pro-financial scam approach to regulation, we'd still be willing to explore this bill if it were actually about leveling the playing field for small businesses, like the Regulatory Flexibility Act did in 1980. But that's not what it's about. Today's bill reads as if someone went through the RFA and identified every opportunity to make the regulatory process at all agencies more complicated, more tedious, and more time-consuming, and less efficient and effective. A recipe that allows big business with rooms full of corporate and regulatory lawyers to frustrate regulations that they don't like. Right out of the gate, the bill starts by expanding the set of rules to which the RFA is applicable from just those with direct economic effects to those with indirect economic effects. The definition of that is not sufficiently explained or cabined in the bill and could be used to intercept without justification many more rules than are currently considered under the RFA. This in turn burdens agencies tasked with protecting the interests of the people with paralysis by analysis. The SBA's Chief Counsel for Advocacy, a position that's languished empty without a Senate-confirmed appointee since 2017, would acquire new authority to, among other things, issue rules governing agency compliance and to intervene in agency adjudication. And all these powers would reside, if Dr. Casey Mulligan is confirmed, with a person who stands ready to deliver on a big business wish list. He opposes the minimum wage, he opposes any fines for polluters, and he opposes sick leave for employees. He favors repealing the Affordable Care Act, and he blames the 2008 mortgage crisis on unemployment insurance and health care subsidies. The RFA currently requires an advocacy review panel to write a report assessing the impact of a proposed rule on small entities. This report is then included in the rulemaking record with an agency response. Under the RFA, this review is only required for 3 agencies, the CFPB, the EPA, and OSHA. It's been criticized as unduly delaying rules from issuance. The proposed bill would extend this cumbersome process and the likely delays to all agencies. These champions of small business even want these review panels to apply to regulations without a showing of a significant economic impact on a substantial number of small businesses. Finally, this so-called Regulatory Flexibility Act removes the flexibility of agencies to move forward with regs on a temporary basis to meet emergencies, thereby delaying regulations when they are needed the most. If my colleagues really wanted to help small business, they would support the nonpartisan GAO's common sense plan laid out in an April report emphasizing the need for the SBA administrator and the Chief Counsel for Advocacy to develop policies and procedures to help agencies better comply with the RFA. If Republicans were interested in supporting small business, they would oppose the administration's efforts to slash the SBA's workforce by half. They would be going back to basics and supporting the SBA offering the 3 C's: capital, contracts, and counseling. Perhaps above all, they would be opposing the unlawful and chaotic emergency tariffs that are on one day and off the next and are killing small businesses across the country. A day doesn't go by that I don't hear from a small business saying it cannot plan, it cannot make any provisions for the future because of the chaotic disarray we've been thrown into by the president's basically illegal tariffs. This bill is not about small business, it's about giving big businesses with ties to the White House exactly what they want, creating a favorable regulatory landscape by gutting rules to protect clean water and air and workers' rights and American consumers. I oppose this Big Business Regulatory Relief Act. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, and yield back.
Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Virginia to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Without objection, the amendment in the nature of a substitute will be considered as read and shall be considered base text for purposes of amendment. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Virginia to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This amendment adds "of 2025" to the title of the bill. The change is not intended in any way to alter the important purpose of the bill. I urge support for the amendment, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there any discussion on the amendment in the nature of a substitute? Mr. Nadler.
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized under the 5-minute rule.
Mr. Chairman, everyone on both sides of the aisle agrees on the need to support small businesses. Federal agencies are already required to consider the effects of their regulations on small businesses under the Regulatory Flexibility Act, or RFA. H.R. 421, however, turns this reasonable requirement into a never-ending hall of mirrors. It would impose burdensome new requirements on agencies that would lengthen and complicate the rulemaking process, exposing businesses of all sizes to nearly constant regulatory uncertainty and posing grave risk to public health and safety. A few provisions of the bill illustrate just how heavy-handed these new requirements are. First, the bill requires agencies to submit their rules to an interagency review process and to solicit public feedback before they have even published them in the Federal Register. This requirement applies to all agencies and virtually every rule that results in any increased costs far beyond the requirements of the current RFA. Second, the bill repeals the authority that agencies have under the current RFA to waive or delay the law's requirements when issuing a regulation in response to an emergency. This senseless provision would prevent agencies from doing their job properly and directly jeopardizes the health and safety of the American people. Third, the bill would vest expansive new authority over the entire federal rulemaking process in a single official, the Chief Counsel for Advocacy at the Small Business Administration. Placing this level of power in a single office that has not had a permanent director since 2017 is strange, to say the least. As I explained during consideration of the Prove It Act, vesting any new authority in this chronically under-resourced and unmanned post is problematic. And yet here we are again, considering another bad bill that would give this office too much power over our agencies and the rules that protect the public. Even more problematic is that President Trump has nominated someone for the position who has questioned limits on polluters, rules that prevent insurance companies from discriminating against people with pre-existing conditions, and the value of sick leave. Putting vast power over the regulatory process in their hands would be a devastating blow to the ability of agencies to protect public health and safety. Finally, on top of all these new burdens on the rulemaking process, agencies would be under constant threat of judicial challenge. Given the expansive nature of the new requirements that the bill imposes, virtually any well-resourced litigant could claim some basis for hauling an agency into court and grinding the rulemaking process to a halt. Ironically, a bill that seems so preoccupied with the supposedly overbearing power of the administrative state would likely require agencies to hire many new lawyers and other staff just to perform all the additional work the bill requires of them. And yet the majority is proceeding with this legislation at the same time that the Trump administration has proposed cutting almost half of the SBA's staff. Without adequate resources, agencies would struggle to enact their regulatory agendas. For our Republican colleagues, of course, this is precisely the point. In sum, while this bill claims to be about helping small businesses, it is really just another front in the Republicans' war on good government. Coupled with the Supreme Court's decision overturning Chevron deference in which the courts defer to agency expertise when analyzing agency actions, the bill illustrates the shape of the Republicans' giveaway to big corporations and their wealthy allies, making it easier for them to sue government agencies with one hand and then stacking the deck in their favor in the courts with the other. If Republicans were serious about helping small businesses, they would join Democrats in protecting a level playing field in the marketplace. This bill does nothing to further that goal, and I urge my colleagues to join me in opposing it. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion? Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in opposition to the bill. You know, if I went home and told my constituents that I passed a bill called Flexibility Improvements Act, they would think that that's a great bill. That's like asking them to read a book by looking at its cover. A more accurate name for H.R. 421 would be "The Coast is Clear, It's Open Season for Big Polluters and Fraudsters Regulatory Repeal Act." And I would move that we rename the bill to that more accurate description. This bill is nothing more than a handout to big corporations and to special interests. It's another attempt by Republicans to stall and obstruct rules that make sure our water is safe to drink, our air is safe to breathe, and our food is safe to eat. We should be working to enhance our government's ability to protect the health and safety of the public rather than finding ways to eliminate those protections, just like Robert Kennedy Jr. did yesterday in firing en masse all of the folks who would recommend vaccines to keep our children, our babies, and our elderly people safe and secure. You just knock that out. That's what we should be doing, trying to protect people rather than eliminating protections, and that's what this legislation does, unfortunately. This bill opens the door for well-resourced companies and trade associations to challenge virtually any rule, gumming up the gears of agency regulations. It imposes additional duties on agencies, but it does not give them enough funding to fulfill their duties, especially now that this Trump-Musk administration has recklessly fired over 250,000 federal employees, our relatives, our friends, our neighbors who get left gut these regulatory agencies that are charged with keeping us safe and protecting us from corruption. That is corrupt. And because of all of that passage of this bill, which is a windfall for special interests and corporations, these are the same folks who they're getting a tax cut. And that tax cut is being paid for by cutting Medicaid, Medicare, SNAP benefits, taking food out of the mouths of hungry babies and children and elderly people. Meals on Wheels, you're gonna cut that. You cut the Job Corps, just trying to stop things that help people so that you could give these fat cat billionaires and corporate polluters and fraudsters a tax cut. It's wrong, it's corrupt, and we should not stand for it. And on behalf of the interest of the public, I announce my full opposition to this bill, and with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion? Mr. Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had another committee I had to go to, so I just got here. I'm not going to go into a discussion of the practices of this administration or the proposals, but I just want to say how I'm happy to see all the people here who fight for Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood has been in my DNA my entire life. It's important for women's health. It's important for women's choice. I thank you for being here and standing up for Planned Parenthood, and I'll always be with you. Now yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion? Gentlelady from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I, too, am excited to see that the advocates from Planned Parenthood who've been waiting outside for over 2 hours were finally able to find seats because it is open to the public, and they should be able to be here and listen to the words and the debate on allowing people to access health care. I also wanted to talk about this bill before us right now, which I oppose. It's so long, and if you're trying to help small businesses, you probably only need 1 page. And it says, hey, I want to help small businesses. I want to make sure your taxes are lower. I want to make sure that we don't have these arbitrary taxes, tariffs being levied on you that are preventing you from hiring employees, keeping your doors open, keeping inventory on the shelves. So when I see something that's umpteen pages that's all about helping small businesses, I do get a little curious and maybe even skeptical. So I actually shared this with some small businesses in my district who were like, WTF, because it does not say anything in here about helping me lower the costs. And while it portends to be opening the doors for small businesses to find success, this is an administration that is killing the successes of small business because it's killing trade opportunities. I was just reading through some comments from a number of small businesses that said, hitting companies like mine with tariffs are gonna, jack up my costs to over $100,000. Many of our materials are imported. We're concerned that the price increase of our raw goods is going to go up. Small businesses like mine run on a small margin, so a 25% increase in any product is going to hurt like the dickens. That is what small businesses care about, not the word salad that's in this legislation. And it really does, it's subterfuge, truthfully, because it opens the door to corruption. I think there is a conspiratorial element to this piece of legislation because it allows any kind of entity to challenge regulation. Anyone can slow the process down. And once again, when I'm talking to small businesses, they're not interested in this. They don't have the lawyers to read and translate all that's in this legislation. But big corporations do. They have warehouses of counsel whose sole job is to figure out how to slow down the process so that they can get more out of it. Stay open, hire our community members, make a little bit of profit so they can put more inventory on the shelves and maybe hire more employees and maybe contribute back to the community. That's what they're talking about. And folks in my district are scared. They're not, if they're going to be able to stay open. They're not interested in all this hocus pocus, in this legislation that actually creates large opportunity for manipulation. Because anybody can challenge the regulation. You can open up another fake entity that's really designed to muck up the system. So I know that this is a talking point, right? Ooh, we're helping small business, but you're not by doing most of the stuff in here. And then you're going to cut SBA? The Small Business Administration is actually one of the best tools for helping small business.